In this video, we're going to be replacing the knock sensor on this 2008 Acura MDX. To remove this sill panel, I'm going to try and get up underneath one of the sides with your hands and just work your way across. What you're going to hear are these clips in the middle release. And rotate it out. What you're doing is you're releasing these clips and you're popping it out of these downward retainers here. One of our clips fell out. Just go ahead and put that back in place. So now we're going to remove our kick panel. What you're going to want to do is make sure your e-brake is all the way up and released. We're going to take this rubber gasket from right here at the end of our kick panel. Just pinch it and pull up just until you've got it past your kick panel. Now what we're going to do is go straight back behind the e-brake. There's this plastic clip, push clip. And we're going to remove just a panel tool. And that's going to be pushed onto a stud. Now, just to make it easier on ourselves, we can pull the cover of our fuse panel off, put that aside, grab our kick panel in a couple of different places here or down the bottom here. We're going to pull it forward, and you can see we're stuck on our hood release. So we're going to pull outward from the bottom and off our hinge, our hood release hinge. That's the one clip on the inside that we were pulling outward to release. Now we can set this aside. All right, so what we're going to do is push our e-brake pedal all the way in. Give us a little bit more room here. And what we're looking for is this first blue relay above your fuse panel, or above your fuses. All right, so we're going to take this relay out. Just going to grab a pair of bent needle nose pliers without crunching it. Just lightly grab it and pull it straight out. All right. So now we can set that aside. From here, with that relay removed, I'm going to go ahead and start your vehicle and run it until it's out of gas and stumbles to a stop. Okay, try that one more time just to make sure. Okay, now we've removed the pressure from the fuel line. All right, so now we can take our relay and put it back in. And reinstall our kick panel. Just going to slide it into place. Remember, we have one pin. We have one pin to press in and one clip to locate in the back. We'll locate that clip first. All right, so we're somewhat in line there. We have to pull our hood release latch open, slide our kick panel over. All right, so once we feel that we're in place, just go ahead and give it a little tap here. If you are in place, you'll hear it clip in and it'll be locked. Now what you can do is take your push clip here, set it right onto that stud, press it in place. Take your fuse box cover, slide that back into place. From here now, if you want, you can remove tension on your e-brake. Now we're going to put our gasket back in place over our kick panel. The easiest way to do this is start from the top and just roll it down. Then come back and just push it in to seat it. Two things to keep in note. These clips on the inside, these clips go straight down. You want to hook these in first. And these clips here are going to want to find the holes in the floor. These clips on this side will locate when you have these in place. So we're going to focus on the inside first and then push straight down. All right, almost falls into place. Now you can tap those clips in place. Make sure your gasket's on the outside. All right, so last step to relieving pressure in your fuel line is just to vent your fuel tank in your return line. If you want to, you can just go ahead and put this on there a couple of turns. Don't lock it into place, leave it a little loose. I'd leave this gas door open just to remind yourself this isn't fully seated until you're done with the job. All right, so now we've located our fuel line under the hood. What we're going to do is remove this cover. Pull out from the back side and set this aside. Now what we're looking to do is separate this line by pushing and removing these clips. Before you do that, let's put down some kind of spill protection for any residual gas in the line. Okay. Now we can separate these clips. Now there are fuel line disconnect tools. We're just going to use something we think you guys may have at home, which is just a pair of flat pliers or panel clips. And we can just separate that line. Pull it apart. You can see we have a little bit of residual fuel in the line. And we can just let that drain. This is the time, and you just want to make sure you're free and clear of any debris. If you have anything you need to clean up, now's the time to do it before you reassemble. So at this point, it's dripped. I think everything that's going to come out of it. What I like to do, this is a little large for this, but we'll use it. Take a rag or whatever you're using to collect your spill and just wrap that line while you're working. That'll keep it dripping into this rag if anything else comes out. And it'll also keep it free and clear of any debris getting in there. A 10mm socket. Go ahead and disconnect your negative terminal. Set that aside. As we're going to disconnect our mass airflow, press this electrical connecting clip, pull it out. We can set that aside. Try and set it somewhere plugged down so no debris is going to land in there. Now we can remove our air box. It's going to be an 8mm socket. Typically you'd have 4 screws, 4 captured screws. 2 of ours broke off, so we only have 2 to work with here. All right, so now you can take your air filter out, set that aside. And we can just keep working down here. Remove our intake tube. We're going to remove this from the tube. We're going to do that with the Phillips screw down bottom. So we're going to remove this clamp here. We're just going to start to disassemble all the way back to our intake. I'm going to use a 7/32 socket, a 1/4" drive here. Now we can take our intake box top right off. Now continuing down our air intake tube, if you wiggle it, you see we have a few things connected to it. We're going to start right here with this hose clamp. Just going to squeeze that. Pull back on this line. All right, now that we've removed that, we just go ahead and rest it right there. We can disconnect our map sensor electrical connection, squeeze down that tab, pull the plug backwards. move that aside. That map sensor is connected on that bracket. All right, now what we can do is remove our tube. I'm going to go back to the 7/32 tool. Just move that clamp. We can just rotate that hose right out of position. There's going to be a little rotation and a little pull. Okay, you can take that right out. All right, so this is the clamp that we were loosening with the 7/32. All right, so we're going to remove this hose here from our intake. Just going to squeeze our clamps. There it is. Move that out of the way. Sometimes they've been on there a while, they don't want to move. We can get in here with a pick tool, pressing down against the pipe and rotating in versus going into the hose. And see if we can get underneath that hose and just break that seal. And then just use a pair of pliers lightly. Give it a little rotate. Now it should be able to back off. All right, set that aside. So we have one more hose going right up into our intake here. You can see this hose is possibly going to be a little issue. It's got a little bulge in it, so we're just going to squeeze that clamp, move it well out of the way. See if we can get this to come off. This is because of the angle, it's very hard to rotate with the pair of pliers and pushing away. Trying to be careful not to do damage with your pliers. And we just check that hose. Looks to be in good shape. Let's set that aside. And we have this here connected to the intake. We have 2 bolts and an electrical connection. We'll remove that now. Just press the tab and pull that plug straight back. And set that plug aside. Now we'll get on our 2 bolts. All right, so now that we have our hose clamps back, we're going to remove these 2 lines. These 2 lines are coolant lines. So what we're going to do is just put a rag down just to collect any spill or any drips. Do the same thing on the bottom. A little bit more coolant in that line. It's fine. All right, ideally, you're not dropping a lot of coolant out of the system. You definitely want to make sure when you're done with this process, you check your coolant level after the vehicle's run. So from here, we can move on to our electrical connections. Just want to move this hose out of the way. And you can see there's a rubber boot over your throttle body connection. Just pull that boot back. You should give access to the clip on the back side. So press that clip and pull the connector off. And try not to get any coolant in the plug. This whole plate and bracket here is going to come off with your intake. So what we're going to do is take off this electrical connection here. And because it's really hard to get to the hose clamp on the back bottom side on this hose here, we're going to take it off from right here. So we'll do this electrical connection first. Squeeze and pull off. And using a long pair of needle nose, squeeze that hose clamp. Pull it back and out of the way. Just using these pliers to try and spin that hose and break it free. And just pull it straight off. All right, so now we're going to take this top cover off of our intake. There is a sequence in removing these bolts. There's also a sequence in reinstalling these bolts. So first bolt we're going to take out is going to be right here. And it's a 10mm socket. This is actually a nut on this one. Set that aside. Number 2 is going to be right here. Number 3, back here. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6. Straight back, number 7. Number 8. Number 9. Number 10. 11. And final 12. Just go back and remove them all fully. All right, so now we can remove this cover. You can try just pulling it up by hand. If not, you can get under it with a little pry tool. Just be careful. You don't want to crack your intake. Just don't put a lot of leverage down. Shouldn't need much. You're just going to pull this straight up. All right, so I'm going to start here, number 1. This is going to be a 12mm socket. These are all 12mm bolts and nuts all the way across to number 2. Right behind it, number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6. Seven. 8. 9. Now that they've all been loose, we can just take them all out. Again, you don't want to drop these into the intake. Now while working in here, you can see you have a little oil left in the valleys. Just be careful of that when you do remove your intake. Put this down on some kind of rag or spill-proof area. Don't get any of this debris or any debris in here. You want to keep this nice and clean. What we're actually going to do, just to do that, we're going to put that top intake cover back on it to stop any debris from falling in. All right, now what we're going to do, you can see your intake manifold is loose. Just going to make sure we're clear all the way around. We can lift this straight up and out. All right, so with the Serpentine belt tool, we are going to get on our belt tensioner. It's going to be the 14mm. Go ahead and put some tension on the tensioner, which will relieve tension on your drive belt. All right, so what we're going to do here is remove our drive belt from our power steering pulley. Just going to slide it down between our tool and the pulley. Now we can relieve tension. And remove our Serpentine belt tool. Try and keep your belt somewhat in place. There are grooves that the belt lines up with. If they don't line up on the underside, it just becomes a little extra pain. Now once you've relieved your pressure on your tensioner from your belt, your tool is going to want to come back. The tensioner is going to want to go all the way back to full release, which means now my tool is stuck. So just be aware of dealing with that. And we'll get the tool out now. All right, so now we have to take our power steering pump out of the way. To do that, we have one 12mm bolt here and one 12mm bolt on the bottom. We'll start up here. A little bit of a tight area. All right, so we're not going to take this bolt all the way out. We're going to use it as a little leverage for when we start to hit the bottom one. We don't want the power steering pump to spin or move while we're putting tension on the bottom bolt. All right, so our next bolt is on the bottom underneath this pulley. Part of the problem is just clearance for your hand and tools. So we're just going to take this AC line off of this bracket and just move it over gently. It'll give us a little bit more room to work in there. This is a 10mm. Again, this is optional. If you can get to it, you don't need to do this. What that'll do is allow us to just gently move that over. Again, this is a hard line all the way back. Don't put too much pressure on it, but just enough to work our tool in there. Okay, now that we've gotten into the power steering pump and we are removing more components, we're going to fill these holes with some paper towel or shop rag, something clean, just so nothing falls down into the cylinders while we're working. All right, so we've decided to make it easy for ourselves and just remove this pulley right off the power steering pump. That'll give us a lot more room to get to that bottom bolt. So we're going to use a pry bar in place to stop the pulley from spinning, and a 19mm shallow socket on the pulley bolt. All right, there's a bolt. There's your pulley. Now you have plenty of access to get to your bolt. So now with the pulley removed, we have a little bit more room to get in here and get on our bottom power steering pump bolt. All right, there's your bottom bolt. We can take out the top. There's your top bolt. Now your power steering pump is free. We can move that out of the way. Again, our hoses are still connected. We just want to be able to move it out of the way, which now that we have the pulley off is also a little bit easier. We have our injector harness as well as our knock sensor harness. We're going to disconnect our knock sensor harness and push it on that clip. Separate the plug. Can move that out of the way. And our injectors, we're going to disconnect those as well on the front. Push that clip. and pull the plug apart. Push the clip. Now what we're going to do here is remove these clips from the actual fuel rail. Get under there and pop them out. All right, we can set that aside. Looking at it from the front, underneath where we unplugged our knock sensor harness, we have one bolt here, one bolt directly under here, another one under here, and another one at the very end. We'll be able to get to this outside one with a socket. All right, so this outside one here is a 12 mil, but because it's so close to the runner, you can barely get a socket on it, and you can barely get a wrench on it. We were able to get a socket, a shallow or a thin wall socket on there, and just get that loose enough. Whatever you do, just don't strip it. All right, that's the bolt. Underneath your fuel rail, right about here, are two 8mm bolts on each side, holding your fuel rail to your intake runner. We're going to take those out now. I'm using a 1/4-inch drive, small swivel will allow us to just get in there and remove those bolts. So now what we're going to do is remove the clips from our fuel rail to our injectors. I'm going to use a small pick tool for that. Easiest if you come from behind with your pick tool and pull the clips back and away from your injectors. Try not to shoot them into the motor. They do have a little spring tension on them. All right, so we're going to take these clips, just work them off of the injectors. While you're doing this, try not to put a lot of pressure wiggling back and forth like I am right now. Don't want to break your injectors, but you do want just enough room to get these clips out. Like that, you should be able to pull your rail. Alright, you can set that aside. With this aside, you can actually see your knock sensor straight down here. So now that we've taken our injector rail off, straight down in here is our knock sensor. We're going to take the plug off, and we're going to, from the side, feed in a 27mm socket, shallow socket, and we're going to come in through the top with our ratchet and extension, take that knock sensor off without needing to take off any more. I'm going to use a long pair of 45-degree needle nose pliers. We're just going to take the clip off. All right. There's our plug. Just set it aside in there. Don't hide it because you will need to get back to it and put it back on. Shallow 27mm. Carefully bring it in from the side. Try not to drop it because there is a valley down there that you could drop it into. Set it right down on top. And what we have here is a swivel attachment and an extension. right through here, down on top of it, and just back your sensor right out. All right, then you can reach back in, grab your socket, pull your swivel, and again with your 45-degree pliers, just go ahead and reach in. If you need a couple more turns, now we've taken it right out. So using our long 45-degree pliers, we're going to put this into position. What we're actually going to do is just switch over to a straight pair and just put a couple of spins on it so that way it doesn't fall out. All right, now that you've got it in position and a thread or two started, we can go ahead and put our 27mm on top. And again, we're going to feed that in from the side and just drop it right on top. All right, so without moving your extension or swivel, we switched over to a torque wrench. We're going to torque it down to 23 foot-pounds. Now we can remove our extension and swivel and reach in from the side and or the top and get our socket. All right, so now with another bent pair of long needle nose, we're going to grab our plug and bring it into position and clip it on. I know this may sound a little hard to do or awkward to do, but it definitely beats disassembling more of your top end if you don't have to. And just press that, clip it into place. All right, now we can plug in our knock sensor back here. And we can work on reinstalling our injectors. Typically when you install injectors, you want to put a little dab of oil around your O-rings and or use new O-rings. We've done that. I'm just going to put our fuel rail back into place. Press down to seat the injectors. Not using too much force. All right, so the clips are going to go on your rail like this. And this open spot here is where it's going to clip on and hold down to your injector. Your injector is going to go in here. So we'll take this off and we'll do that now. Now that we've gotten it on, we're going to move on to our next step. We're going to put our bolts back in. All right, now we can move on to plugging in our injectors and putting the clips harness clips back in place. Now we can put our injector clips back in on the back. All right, so we removed the rear injector rail and plugs because we thought we were going to need to remove the entire intake runner, but we found that after removing the front fuel injection rail that we were able to get in with an extension and a socket. Okay, so now we're going to put our power steering pump back in place. What we're going to do is line it up. With the bolt holes, we're going to put the back bolt in first. Now we can go for our bottom bolt here. All right, now we can go ahead and snug them up. Try our deep socket down there. All right, now we can torque down our power steering pump bolts to 16 foot-pounds. Now we're going to reinstall our power steering pump pulley. Pulley is just going to go into a slotted stud on the pump. There is no right or wrong way. There are no specific grooves. We're just going to slide that onto power steering pump stud and push it as far back into position as you can get it. And we're going to take our nut and thread it on there. So now to tighten down the nut on our power steering pulley, we're going to have to lock the pulley. What we're going to do is use a small pry bar just to set it in place and stop our pulley from spinning while we tighten it down. It's going to be a 19mm socket, and we're going right to the torque wrench. It's going to be torqued down to 47 foot-pounds. Okay. All right, so now we can put our AC line back on. A small little bolt. It's going to be a 10mm bolt. Probably the easiest thing to do is just line it up, put the notch into the bracket, and then thread your bolt in. So now what we can do is put our drive belt onto our pulley and around our tensioner. What we're going to do is just put it onto the pulley. Just pull a little bit of slack on there, pull it slightly tight. Take our Serpentine belt tool and put some tension on our tensioner, and we can put our belt around the tensioner. All right, so once you get your belt tensioner loose, go ahead and put your belt around your tensioner. All right, so now we have our can see our belt is on the pulley, but it's not right. It's not actually on there. We can grab our Serpentine belt tool and loosen our belt tensioner and actually put our belt back into place. We can actually get on it. Okay, so now that we have our belt tensioned and in place on our power steering pulley, we can move on. All right, so when working on your intake and putting your intake back in place, you should have a new gasket. This one is in okay shape. We're going to reuse it. But if you're doing this job, make sure to start with your parts in line. Make sure gaskets are a part of that order. So now we can go ahead and take these placeholders out of our intake tubes. And at this point, you want to make sure no dust, dirt, or debris fall into there or tools. All right, so now we can take our intake throttle body assembly. We can lower this down into place. We're going to line up our studs. So now you can see that this is in place. It's just a little bit wobbly. We're just going to make sure that everything around it is out of the way and not stopping us from making a nice, solid connection. I think right there should be good. Doesn't look like anything else is in the way. We can move forward to tightening it down. All right, so now we can go ahead and put our bolts back into place. So we're just going to drop them all in. Actually, this one, you can tell just by the coating on the outside goes there. I'll have to put them back in the exact same place. But if you can, what we'll do is just take our two bolts, or two nuts rather, and just start them by hand, couple of threads. All right, now you want to come back and just get a couple of threads going by hand. This will make sure they're not cross-threaded. And there will be a sequence of tightening. So we're not going to do any more than just a couple of turns here. And we'll come back and do that sequence. With the 12mm socket, we can go ahead and start snugging these up. We want to do this in a couple of rounds, not go all the way at first. We will finish it with a torque spec. And there is a specific order in which you're going to tighten these down. So we'll do that now. Let's start here, number 1. Just going to snug them up. Number 2 is in here. You just want to pull it down equally. That's the whole point of this. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, this will be number 8, and 9. So now we can torque them down. We're going to start with number 1. We're going to be 16 foot-pounds. 2, 3, 4, and number 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And once you've done that once, go ahead and do it a second time. All right, so when you are doing this job, you're going to need to pull this top intake cover, which inevitably means you're going to need to replace your gaskets. We are going to reuse our gasket because it is in very good shape. We just cleaned it a little bit, make sure there's no debris or dirt on that. But if you're doing this at home, you're doing this for your own car, definitely plan on replacing these gaskets. Now we can go ahead and lower it into place. Just going to line up your 2 studs and then just press down. Now we can put our bolts and our nuts back on. We're just going to put our bolts in place. Start with a couple of threads. And then we'll come back and put them in the sequence the manufacturer specifies. All right, so our first one is going to be right here. These are going to be 10mm bolts. We're just going to lightly snug them up. We're not going for any torque or any real tightening. Just trying to bring this plate down evenly. So that's 1, here's 2. Here's 3. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 will be the nut, 11, and 12 will be the other nut. Okay, now we can come back and we'll torque these all down twice. All right, so now we can torque these down. Our top intake plate that we just put on, all of these are going to be 8.8 foot-pounds. You're going to want to torque them down in sequence again, so this is number 1. And we're going to do this sequence twice. That's 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. 10. 11. And 12. All right, now you would start over, do it again. Okay, so we're going to put this one bolt back on our hose bracket here. And we're going to do, this bolt should have went on before the intake went on to make it a lot easier. What you can do is put it on your extension on your tool and just feed it down in there. Okay. All right, so we can start reconnecting our hoses and our plugs now. What we'll do is just connect this plug because it's right here. Just push in until it'll click. Right underneath it, you have this hose here. Just push that down into place. And we can squeeze our hose clamps and put those back in. Okay. Now moving along, we have this cluster here that we need to reattach. We have this one up top, we can do that. Now what we can do is put all our throttle body connections back on. We're going to start with our main plug to our throttle body. Again, if you remember, you have this rubber boot over the terminal. And just peel back that rubber boot, press your terminal into place, and then make sure to put your rubber boot back. Okay, now that that's done, we can move lower to our cooling lines. Okay, we have one cooling line on the top and one on the bottom. Go ahead and slide those back into position. And now we can move our hose clamps back also. Okay. This here will go into your intake tube. This plug here will go into your intake tube as well. So I'll set those aside. This plug here will go to your throttle body, but because we need a little movement to get into our intake tube, we'll leave that disconnected for right now. And now we'll move along and get to the other side of our intake. All right, so we got a couple of connections in the back here that we moved aside. Here's one, it's going to go on your smaller inlet. And two will be this hose here. Put this back into place. All right. On this side, we have two connections. We have an electrical and a hose. So we'll take our electrical connector that we pushed aside to start, and we'll put that back into place. And then we can take our hose, put that back into place as well, and put the hose clamp back on. All right, so now we can reinstall our air intake tube. You can see we have a notch here, and a small notch in the back side here, and a hose adapter or hose clamp area here. So I'm going to take the hose clamp right off for just now. We'll put this notch into place on the throttle body. So we can take our hose clamp, line it up on top like that so it doesn't rotate under. And move these hoses out of the way and take our intake tube and notch, line it up to our throttle body. There will be a corresponding stop on your throttle body that you're going to line up your notch to. And just press into place. Okay. I'm just going to leave that aside for right a second. Now we're going to take our hose clamp, 7/32 socket, and tighten that down. Now it's tightened down, we can move on. We're going to move on to this hose here. What we're going to do is put our hose clamp back in place and put our hose into place as well. It might not work, this whole thing might move. Like that. All right, so we can take our clamp. And just a little extra. Make sure we're seated all the way in. And we can take our throttle body plug, plug that back in. All right, so now we're left with our air filter in our box. You can take our air filter and just drop it into position. One thing, just make sure your gasket is pushed in all the way around. And you can take your top air cleaner box. And what we're gonna do is actually rest it just like that and attach it to our hose. Now there's a notch on your tube and a notch, corresponding notch on your air intake box. We'll line these two up. I'm just going to spin and push into place. All right, there's a little notch right by your mass airflow on the airbox that you want to match to the notch on your tube. And we can just set that down into place. Now our airbox has 2 of the 4 bolts broken, so we'll just be putting the 2 back in. So these are Phillips or 8mm. We're going to go for the 8mm option. All right, no need to over torque these, just get them nice and snug. All right, again, you would do the other 2. When you're done with that, you can take your mass airflow sensor plug, plug that back in. So now we can take off our cover for our fuel line. We can reattach our fuel line. Again, just make sure you're free and clear of any debris. I'm just going to push that together. Make sure your clip is lined up. All right, try and pull backwards, make sure it's seated. Once you're good there, take your cover. Take your cover and put it back in place. All right, so we can put our battery negative terminal back in. Make sure it's seated all the way down with a 10mm socket. Go ahead and tighten that up. And just for good measure, we'll make sure the positive is still tight. Good. Now that the job's done, you can go ahead and tighten up your gas cap and close it up.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.